On August 7th, the Met Office and the UK Health Security Agency issued widespread heat health alerts across England as high pressure began establishing a southerly flow of hot air pulled directly from continental Europe. That single forecast update confirmed what meteorologists had been watching build for days, Britain's fourth heat wave of 2026, arriving after what has already become the driest July on record for both England and Wales. Temperatures are expected to climb into the low 30s through the middle of the week, with peak values potentially reaching 36 degrees Celsius across East Anglia and the southeast by Thursday, August 13th. Here's the part almost nobody covering this heat wave is explaining clearly enough. Based on the Met Office's own extended outlook, and based on how nearly every one of this summer's previous heat waves has actually ended, the way this one eventually breaks matters just as much as the heat itself. This is the story of exactly how severe this fourth heat wave is shaping up to be, why Britain's driest July on record has set up genuinely dangerous conditions underneath it, and what the Met Office's own forecasting language tells us about how this pattern is actually likely to end. No exaggeration, just what the Met Office and the UK Health Security Agency are actually reporting. Drop a comment and tell me if you are currently in one of the areas under a heat health alert, because after 3 previous heat waves this year, I want to know whether this one genuinely feels different to you. I read every one of these. If you want grounded weather coverage instead of recycled panic, subscribe. It is free, and a like helps this reach people before this pattern reaches them. Let us go for 5,000 likes on this one. Now let us get into it. To understand why this fourth heat wave carries real risk beyond simply uncomfortable. Temperatures, you first need to understand exactly how dry the ground underneath it already is. According to Met Office Science Manager Dr. Amy Doherty, July 2026 was a genuinely remarkable month in Britain's climate record, with England and Wales both provisionally recording their driest July on record, and Wales additionally recording its joint warmest. Southern England fared even more extremely, recording just 1.9 millimeters of rain across the entire month, roughly 3% of its long-term average, making it the driest month Southern England has ever measured in its full historical record. England and Wales also each recorded their sunniest month ever observed during that same stretch, a genuinely rare combination of extremes for a country whose weather is more typically defined by cloud and rainfall than by prolonged sunshine and drought. That combination, record dryness paired with record sunshine, has left the ground across large parts of the country baked hard and cracked well before this fourth heat wave has even reached its peak, with a drought already formally declared in Wales and several other regions sitting in the officially recognized prolonged dry weather phase that typically precedes one, alongside hosepipe bans, already affecting millions of households across the country this summer. The heat building through this week follows a now familiar mechanism, the same stubborn ridge of high pressure that has repeatedly stalled over Britain and the wider continent this summer, pulling hot air north from Europe and trapping it in place rather than allowing the country's usual changeable Atlantic weather to move it along. Meteorologists have spent much of this summer tracing that recurring pattern back to changes in the jet stream, the high-altitude river of wind that normally steers weather systems across Britain on a fairly regular rotation, since a jet stream that weakens or bulges further north than usual allows exactly this kind of stalled ridge to settle in and hold for days or weeks at a time, rather than being pushed through the way an ordinary summer high-pressure system typically would. What makes this specific pattern worth watching closely is the north-south split forecasters expect to persist through the coming days, with Scotland and Northern Ireland continuing to see rain and comparatively cool conditions, while southern England and Wales bear the brunt of the rising heat. A divide that has become a recurring feature of this summer's repeated heatwave pattern, rather than a one-off quirk of this particular week. Here is where this story moves beyond simply reporting another hot week and into the part that genuinely deserves more attention, what actually happens once this heat wave eventually breaks. The Met Office's own longer-range outlook has been explicit on this point, stating plainly that further heat waves are possible but not guaranteed through the rest of August, and that whether any given hot spell continues or collapses depends specifically on the position and strength of the high-pressure ridge and, crucially, on whether Atlantic frontal systems or thundery interruptions eventually break the pattern down. That specific phrase, thundery interruptions, is not a throwaway detail. It reflects a well-documented pattern in how UK heat waves typically end, not through a gradual gentle cooling, but through a sudden, sometimes violent thundery breakdown, since a prolonged stretch of hot, humid, trapped air builds up enormous atmospheric instability that has to release somehow once the blocking high pressure finally weakens enough to let it go. Recent UK heatwave history illustrates this pattern clearly. During a comparable stretch of extreme August heat in 2020, temperatures reached 36.4 degrees Celsius at Heathrow before the pattern broke down into severe thunderstorm warnings covering much of England and Wales. bringing the risk of 30 to 40 millimeters of rain in a single hour, and, in isolated spots, as much as 60 millimeters within just 3 or 4 hours, roughly equivalent to an entire month's average rainfall falling in a single afternoon. A similarly abrupt thundery breakdown followed extreme heat again in more recent years, with amber thunderstorm warnings, flooded roads, and lightning strikes marking the actual end of the hot spell, rather than a simple return to ordinary mild British weather, a pattern meteorologists have observed repeatedly enough that it has become almost a signature feature of how a genuinely prolonged UK heatwave tends to conclude, rather than an unusual exception. That pattern, extreme heat giving way not to calm relief but to genuinely dangerous severe weather, is precisely the mechanism meteorologists are watching for as this fourth heatwave eventually runs its course. The danger in that specific sequence is considerably sharper this year than it might be in an ordinary summer, precisely because of how dry the ground already is heading into it. Soil that has spent an entire record dry month baking under record sunshine loses much of its normal ability to absorb rainfall gradually, meaning that when a thundery breakdown does eventually arrive, intense, short-duration downpours are considerably more likely to run straight off hardened ground and into rivers and drains rather than soaking in, sharply raising the risk of flash flooding, even though the region genuinely needs the rain to ease its ongoing drought conditions. Fire chiefs have already issued public appeals ahead of this fourth heatwave, specifically because of how dangerously dry vegetation across the country has already become, a direct consequence of the same record-breaking dry spell now setting up this latest round of extreme heat. It is worth being precise about what remains genuinely uncertain here, because forecasting exactly how and when a heat wave like this one will eventually break is considerably harder than forecasting the heat itself. The Met Office has been explicit that its own longer-range outlook cannot yet say exactly where any breakdown will occur, how severe any resulting thunderstorms might be, or precisely when the current pattern will finally give way, since that depends on details of atmospheric behavior that only become clearer as the actual event approaches. What forecasters can say with confidence is the broader shape of the pattern, sustained heat building on top of already historic dryness, with a thundery or Atlantic-driven breakdown remaining the most likely way this specific heat wave eventually ends, consistent with how nearly every comparable UK heatwave in recent memory has actually concluded. There's a broader context worth understanding here as well, since this is genuinely Britain's fourth heatwave within a single summer, following separate spells in May, June, and July. Most British summers see at most 1 or 2 heat waves by the Met Office's own technical definition, 3 consecutive days meeting a specific regional temperature threshold, making 4 distinct heatwave events within a single season, a genuinely unusual pattern rather than an ordinary British summer simply running a bit warm, and one that has kept both fire services and water companies operating under sustained pressure for months rather than responding to a single isolated hot spell. So what does all of this actually mean if you live anywhere across England or Wales right now? In the immediate term, follow standard heat safety guidance through the peak of this heat wave, stay hydrated throughout the day, avoid strenuous outdoor activity during the hottest afternoon hours, and check on elderly, neighbors, or relatives living alone, since they remain the population most likely to suffer serious harm without recognizing the danger themselves until it becomes serious. Just as importantly, stay alert once forecasters begin signaling. This pattern is finally breaking down, since the same historic dryness making this heat wave dangerous on its own also means any eventual thunderstorms carry a real flash flood risk, particularly in areas that have seen little meaningful rain in weeks. Keep an eye on Environment Agency flood warnings alongside any Met Office severe weather alerts as this week progresses, rather than assuming the end of the heat automatically means the danger has passed, since the transition out of this heat wave may end up carrying more immediate risk than the heat itself has this entire week. The honest, grounded summary is this: Britain's fourth heat wave of 2026 is currently building across England and Wales, with temperatures expected to peak near 36 degrees Celsius in the southeast by Thursday, arriving directly on top of what has already become the driest July on record for both countries and the driest month southern England has ever measured. The Met Office's own longer-range outlook points specifically to a thundery or Atlantic-driven breakdown as the most likely way this heat wave eventually ends, a pattern consistent with how recent UK heat waves have historically concluded, and one that carries genuine flash flood risk given how thoroughly dried out the ground already is heading into it. Fire chiefs have already issued public appeals given the elevated wildfire risk this same dryness has created, and this now marks the fourth distinct heat wave Britain has experienced this year. It's odd, genuinely unusual frequency compared to an ordinary British summer. We are going to keep tracking this pattern the way we tracked it today, straight from the Met Office and the UK Health Security Agency, not recycled headlines. Subscribe so you do not miss it once this heat wave actually breaks down, because based on everything forecasters are currently saying, how it ends may matter just as much as how hot it gets. And leave that comment below. Tell me if this summer's repeated heat wave pattern has changed how you think about British weather, because a fourth distinct heat wave in a single year is genuinely rare territory. Because behind every one of these heat health alerts is a farmer watching cracked bone-dry fields and praying the eventual rain arrives gently, rather than all at once. A fire crew already stretched thin from a summer of repeated call-outs, bracing for one more surge, and a family finally opening their windows again this week, uncertain whether relief is actually coming, or whether the same stubborn pattern is simply about to reassemble itself once more. 5,000 likes on this one. Let us go. See you in the next one.